I'd love for you guys to go ahead and first give a short introduction.
Hi, I'm Nafissa Yakubova. I'm a visiting researcher at Facebook AI Research, and I work on the intersection of machine learning and medical imaging, specifically on a fast MRI project, which is a research collaboration we have with NYU Langone Health. And I think Dan is in the audience, that he's one of our main collaborators.
I'm Jayashree Kalpathy-Cramer. I'm a researcher at Mass General Hospital. Our lab also does a lot of work in the intersection of machine learning and medical imaging. We look at the entire spectrum from developing novel machine learning algorithms to testing them on many different diseases and across different imaging modalities to translating them and implementing them in the clinic.
Hi, I'm Kyle Stanley. I am a dental surgeon by trade. I'm the Chief Clinical Officer at Pearl. We are using computer vision to solve complicated problems in different aspects of dentistry, both from the patient side, the clinician side, the clinic manager, and also the dental laboratory side.
Great. So could you guys each kind of, in a little bit more detail, tell the audience how you're leveraging computer vision and AI in the work that you're doing? And what's the one biggest implication that you feel as a result of your work?
Yeah, I can get started. So we are solving a basically image reconstruction problem. Can you take undersampled MRI signals and reconstruct original-looking image while preserving diagnostic value? We're not making diagnostics, but it's important to make sure that you're not introducing something that wasn't there or taking away what's supposed to be there. And the biggest impact would be for people if you can make these scans faster. You can image a lot of people. You can image children who don't know the concept of lying still in the scanner or moving body parts like hearts and lungs. And a lot of work we do is it's an open science. So the impact I see for the society is to enable machine learning and medical imaging communities to come together and use their complementary expertise to solve problems.
Okay. Can I just ask the audience really quickly, how many people have had an MRI so they understand what it means to have to hold your breath and be stuck inside an MRI machine? Yeah, and so the result of this being that instead of having to sit in there for that long and hold your breath at different specific times, that you'd be able to do it quicker and more efficiently.
Yeah, that's the goal.
Great.
So in our lab, we look at, again, different modalities, including MRI and CTs. We also do a lot of work in ophthalmology, so looking at fundus images of the back of the eye. In terms of we also work a little bit in the image reconstruction space, in the diagnostic space, and the assessing response to therapy and so on. In terms of impact, I think one of the things that we are pretty excited about is the ability of these algorithms to affect access to care. A lot of these some of the best practitioners are in the US and in areas like Boston and New York and so on. A lot of the rest of the world does not have access to the same kind of clinicians or facilities and so on. So what we're really hoping to do is by sort of distilling the knowledge of the best clinicians that we work with and allowing them to be deployed across the world. We do a lot of work in places like India, Nepal, and Thailand and so on. Perhaps, especially for the ophthalmology case, we can take these algorithms that have been trained using the clinicians here. Maybe we can apply some of this and improve access to care worldwide. So.
And if I can ask, in particular, I know that you guys have deployed this with a childhood blindness disease.
Exactly. So we're working a lot in a disease called retinopathy of prematurity. This is one of the leading causes of preventable blindness worldwide, and it is a disease when babies are born too early or low birth weight. It's one of the reasons that the babies end up going blind is because it was not diagnosed early. It's a disease that can actually be treated if it was diagnosed, but very often what happens is the baby does not get diagnosed early enough. So what we're doing is working with a set of hospitals in India. They have a telemedicine set up where they go out in the community and screen the local population. They send all of the images to a clinician. What we are hoping to do is deploy this. We are working with them to deploy the technology in the screening scenario so that they get diagnosed early enough. We can also look at follow-up. So is the disease progressing? It's getting better, things like that. So again, assessing early whether the baby is getting worse and needs treatment is something we are working on. So.
Thanks.
Yeah, in the dental space, there's really three things that we're trying to do. Number one, early detection, just like you were saying. If you find something earlier, you can do a filling instead of doing a crown or a root canal or an extraction. The other thing is a consensus of diagnosis. As many might know, you go to one dentist, they tell you one thing. You go to another dentist, they tell you one thing. I always say that you go to 10 dentists, you get 11 different opinions. And I think that's the same across all aspects of medicine, not just dentistry. Getting a consensus of a diagnosis of the masses would be really nice, both for the doctor and for the patient. The patient would then know that they can trust what the doctor is telling them, and also the doctor can know that they have this second opinion over their shoulder, telling them that it's okay. And then on the dental laboratory side, it's really better, faster, cheaper. It's ultimately a manufacturing business. And so when you have really kind of like sweatshops of people that are doing small, minute, repeatable procedures on a crown, let's say, if we can automate that, then we can make it better, faster, and cheaper.
Great. So, all of the implications that I'm hearing is that you can improve your aspect of medicine by making it more affordable, by making it more accessible, and making it easier to do. But I know, these are giant strides that computer vision and AI are making. But from our previous conversations, I know that all of you started with some of the tedious tasks of raw data and figuring out how to collect, structure, and label those data sets. It begs the question then, how reproducible are your results? If that's where you had to start and that's what you had to do, how many people can automatically pick up your algorithm and reproduce it within their institution?
That's a great question, and I think it's one of the main important things to be solved if you want to apply AI in medicine, because we are hoping that our work can be reproducible, and to do that, you need a couple of points. You need to have a data set that's not only you can access, but other researchers can access and use it as a benchmark. You need to have your baseline models out there so people can compare and have the evaluation metrics that you all agree on. Otherwise, you can't really have a scientific reproducibility. And so that's what we're hoping to open source. We've already open sourced part of it, and I think that's the real challenge. And our partners at NYU have generously made their data set public. And the more people, open up the way they work, it's going to solve this problem. And also, it's not just amount of data, I think. Of course, the more data you have for deep learning is great, but the diversity of the data, that different medical institutions have different formats, different data sets. So the model you train on one, does it translate into other is the key question, and we're hoping to solve that.
I completely echo everything that was said previously. One of the things that we've definitely seen is models trained on one set of training data, whether it was an acquisition system or population, doesn't necessarily translate well to other cases. So in terms of reproducibility, something we really have to evaluate is how well it does outside the distribution of the data that it was trained on. The earlier panel on synthetic data was kind of interesting because we can build in some of the robustness against that using some methods that were developed in the synthetic data field. So for instance, using the same some of the similar techniques, we can say what that same image would look like if it was acquired by a different system. So we can build in some of that robustness. So it's the same just like you can make a horse look like a zebra, you can take an image that was acquired on a particular scanner and make it look like it came from a different scanner, for instance, and that allows you to build some amount of robustness. Going back to the reproducibility of the consensus question, what we do see is a lot of variability between readers in evaluating an image. So to the extent that we can get multiple readers to evaluate the image, we build, again, a lot more robustness against that kind of variability. So we highly recommend at least seeing different people reading the same image and evaluating how well the algorithm does against the different readers, as well as using that information while building the training algorithm.
And then can I ask, because I know that the algorithms that you developed for childhood blindness disease, you actually say outperform doctors at diagnosis. for it. Is that part of how you trained your algorithm, was having multiple people look at the same scans?
That's a really good question. One of the things we did is have the same set of images evaluated by multiple people. And at least in our data set, what we found was one of the reasons for disagreement between the different clinicians was a difference in bias. Some people are more specific and some people are more sensitive, so they sort of lie along different parts of the curve. And so by getting data from multiple clinicians, we're able to build something more like a consensus answer, as opposed to making it behave like an extreme person. So
That's great.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you were saying that NYU is making their data set public. That doesn't happen in the dental sector. I think that dentistry is always the last medicine that anybody thinks of, and so there's certain things where we're definitely behind. And then there's also this balance of the social aspect of everybody having the same data, but then the business aspect of, well, this is all my data and this is all your data. And so it'd be great if everybody shared their data, but that just doesn't happen. And then you have the difficulty of HIPAA and personal health data that comes from each data set, which is a gigantic risk. And that's one of the difficulties that we have.
And so, if I understand correctly, you guys are also developing kind of tools in which you can bridge that divide.
Yeah, exactly.
Awesome. So, do you guys see data then as the biggest handicap to deep medicine, or what's the biggest thing that we're going to have to overcome in order to achieve this in the next 10 years?
I'm more of a hopeful person. So the thing is, we have a lot of data in medicine and medical imaging generated every day. And while privacy is very important, there are ways to still share the data with researchers, with collaborators, while preserving the privacy of the data, right? So as much as possible. But without it, you can't really move AI in medicine forward. But I think data is only part of it. The other part is, even if you have the data, did you, like as mentioned earlier, do you have the metrics you can measure that you can agree on? Do you have the code base, at least the baselines you can compare to? And I think it's even more important for me is to see the two fields to work together. Otherwise, you cannot solve these problems alone. And so complementary expertise is the key. And this is what we've seen was working with NYU collaborators as well, is we need each other. And to solve any problem in medicine with AI, you need to work together.
I agree that data is a problem. Certainly for us, setting data outside of institution is challenging, and I think that's true for a lot of medical institutions. Is that there's fairly strict, with good reason, strict privacy and PHI and other issues that limit the ability for us to share data, even anonymized data, outside of the institution because of concerns about. For a lot of good reasons. So the things that we are working on, again, the synthetic data is one way we might be able to get away with that, get away from that concern. The other thing that we are doing is methods to learn across institutions using things like federated and distributed learning, where the data stays within the firewall of each institution, but the models can sort of learn across multiple institutions. And these technologies that are coming up now might allow you to learn models that are more robust from many institutions without the data leaving the institution. There's still a lot of work in that area, but it's one approach that we're taking in terms of that, in the data question.
Yeah, data at first was a problem for us. It's really not now. I think that our two biggest problems are number one, the lack of diagnosis of the masses, what we talked about before. Everybody having different ideas. You can train a model on what I think is correct, but then if you showed it to my dad, who's also a dentist, he would think that something that I say is wrong. Or our CEO's father is also a dentist. You would show him, and he would say, "Well, I agree with this, but not with that." And then the second aspect, at least in the dental space, is that every tech stack is different. We're not dealing with large institutions. We're not dealing with Kaiser Permanentes. We're dealing with, large clinics that may have 100 clinics, and every single clinic has a different tech stack. And so we have to make custom integrations in order to get into their tech stack, which becomes very difficult and expensive and laborious. So that's maybe an interesting one that may be different for us, and I don't know if it's different in the medical realm as well.
Yeah, I was going to say, you two are nodding very adamantly over there.
Yeah, there's a term called interoperability. So between institutions, can you really, scale across?
We definitely, that's really a challenge. Developing the model is only one part of the problem. Getting it into the hands of the clinicians in a way that does not disrupt their workflow is a really big problem as well. If you want to get this model into the hand of a clinician, it has to be in a seamless way for them to use it. If you expect them to get it out of the system, take it to a different computer, put it in there, have it analyze it, and then come back, that's much less likely to happen rather than in a way that they're typically used to working in. So the last mile of getting the model, which is really the data is less of an issue than all of these other things, is the integration into the workflow. That's really challenging.
Yeah, we have we have some large, what we call DSOs, dental service organizations, that have hundreds or even thousands of clinics. And if they say we want to roll it out, we say, okay, well, every tech stack's the same, right? They're like, oh, no. Everybody's using a different sensor for their radiographs. Everyone's using a different server. Everything is different. So each individual office becomes a different challenge. And that's because in the dental world, a lot of the times they're being bought up. So it's a private practice that then is bought up by this larger service organization, and they just keep whatever tech stack, the mom and pop shop had before.
And so, I mean, with all of these challenges, let's say, it's 2022 now. What does the ideal workflow actually look like?
It's only 10 years, right? So, so I think there is still a lot of things need to be solved besides the issues we mentioned. There is still a lot of research needs to be done because sometimes what you work on natural images does not directly translate into medical imaging, and you need to solve a unique set of challenges. But I can see that at some point soon we would be working, it wouldn't be replacing doctors, it wouldn't be replacing things that work now, but it would be a tool that enhances what you do as a clinician, and it can optimize your clinical workflow, it can help you, accelerate imaging or reconstruct or other things, but it would be a tool that you use to do your job better, faster, and more efficiently. That's what I hope it would be.
I completely agree with that. I think better integration between the hardware and the post-processed images is also something that I think is pretty exciting. So allowing us to take better images faster, that allow the diagnosis to happen in a better way. Very often right now we sort of separate the image acquisition from the image analysis. And I think a better integration between the acquisition and the analysis in terms of assessing quality, in terms of allowing you to do follow-up. So very often clinicians are looking to see if their cancer is responding or getting bigger or smaller, and treating each image sort of as a separate thing is not necessarily the best way to look at it. So can we look at optimizing how we acquire follow-up scans in a way that allow us to measure these changes? I think a lot of exciting things, again, a lot of research is needed, a lot of exciting things might happen. I think if we can figure out how to get this into the workflow in an assistive fashion in the next 10 years, which looks promising, I think we'll be in a good place.
I think on the dental side, there's going to be a big paradigm shift with people not going to dental offices to get their imaging done. The imaging will probably come to them, and then the patient will have really the access to their own care, and that may be shopped to different doctors, and then these doctors will then be able to say, well, I'm better at this, because they'll already have a diagnosis from all of the imaging, whether it's radiographs or face scans or intraoral scans, things that we're already doing. And then from there, that's going to totally change how treatment is done. The first time you see your doctor, you're probably doing the treatment because they already know everything about you. You've already discussed all of the payment structure, and you know what your risk is depending on your race or your gender or your age. And using all that big data, you'll be able to know exactly what is the best option for you and go right into treatment.
I think that you just furthered one of the big ideas that we talk about at LDV a lot, which is this idea that by 2028, patients will own their own data and they will consult with their doctors, and all of this will be powered by visual technologies.
Yeah, I think it'll happen much sooner, in the dental realm at least. Yeah.
That's great. What about in the medical realm where you guys work? Does this look like something that's on the horizon?
I mean, in general, it's going towards there, right? But I don't know if it's going to happen in 10 years. Maybe it might take longer. But that's the ideal world that we're all striving to, that you own your data, you're able to, have a personalized options for you.
Absolutely. So would you rather have your own scans read by AI or by a doctor at this point in time?
Why not both? Yeah, so I would want to, if I have to go into radiology, I would want to go to a radiologist who is using the AI tools, right? So that would be my preference.
I think that's probably where we are today, is that the algorithms we have tend to be a little narrow in terms of being able to diagnose certain diseases really well, but not necessarily very general. So having the diagnostics assistance of these AI technologies with having somebody look at it today is good. But I do expect a future where I think there's a lot of value that can come from these algorithms.
And, just for the two of you, is there anywhere where people in our audience could go right now and get their scans seen by both AI and by a doctor?
I haven't seen one in practice yet because it takes to validate before you can put your research into clinical practice. So I think that's what's happening now. People doing research, trying to validate, try to test it out, but maybe soon.
Yeah, I think a lot of, before these algorithms can be used, they need to go through FDA approval and other things as well. So fairly early in the stage of that process right now. There are companies whose business model is that you can upload a scan and have it read by the AI, but we'll have to see where that goes. So.
And what about in dentistry?
On the second question, we're in the process of FDA approval right now, and we're also doing some pilots. So there are some places in the country where that's happening.
Very cool.
I think for the first question is I would love to have an algorithm that's looking at the sensitivity, and then have a doctor that is telling me the specificity and finding the false positives on that.
For all of us non-dentists out there, could you explain to us the difference between the sensitivity and...
Yeah, so if you have an algorithm that's saying this could be caries, which is decay, okay, so cavity. This could be a cavity, this could be a cavity, this could be a cavity, this could be a cavity. Then I'd like the doctor to say yes, 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 and no, that's not, and get that. Because I think that one of the important things that doctors can really do well is they have the empathy, and they know, they can look at your situation from a human level. And I think that that's still needed right now, and it will still be needed for a long time until we're at, the AGI point of general intelligence.
Yeah, and if I might add to that, the reason I say you still need doctors is diagnosis doesn't take just looking at one image. It involves a lot of information that you need to gather before you make a final diagnostics. So this is why even if you have a perfect algorithm that looks into image and finds that one abnormality, you wouldn't want that. You want the other human expertise of the years of medical practice and looking at the other data sets you have, data points about you that they know to make a decision.
This is why we call our product second opinion and not first opinion. It's just that reason. Yeah. So the algorithm will find things. The doctor ultimately makes a diagnosis.
Makes sense. For each one of you, what excites you the most about visual technologies and their future impact on healthcare and society?
In terms of visual, I think I'm really excited that there's so much potential in this field that still needs to be done and to be curious about, and eventually enable us to look into ourselves better. We look into space, we look at black holes, can we know more about our bodies and reduce human suffering as much as possible? That's what really excites me. And we've seen a lot of wonders in computer vision technologies and natural images. I would love to see that translated into medical imaging and solve the unique problems that comes with it.
Could you expand on that idea a little bit?
For example, in terms of the computer vision work in the natural images, you see you can basically generate the celebrity faces without, things like that. Can we put those models into good use cases too, which is solving real world problems, or you can really detect something, you can reconstruct image. But in medical imaging, they have unique sets, right? There are details that matter. It's not like you want to create a picture of a landscape or somebody's face, but a little tiny, in the tiny pixels that are the problems remain. And you want to learn to solve that and So there, in terms of for computer vision itself, there's a more challenge just from that field of view, even if it's not the medical problems you're solving. So for me, it's exciting. Both fields have an opportunity to advance ahead together.
So I think improved access to care, I think, is a really exciting opportunity here. I think we, as a nation, spend a lot on healthcare without necessarily having the results to show for it, and hopefully some of these technologies will allow us to figure out the best way to scan, the best ways to analyze the images, improve overall delivery of health, I think, can be improved with these technologies. So.
And so when you talk about ways to scan, right? Because I know that especially in the remote regions where we're looking to bring healthcare and increase access, what do you see that looking like?
So an example, for instance, might be when we're having somebody else, in our particular case, for the ophthalmology case, having people take images who may not be the clinicians but trained technologists, can we help them acquire better images, for instance, so that we are able to tell right away if the quality of the image is good, is it the same way, are they able to follow up, look at changes, things like that. So that's one aspect of visual technology that might help us, especially in the remote setting, in improving access to care. In terms of other things, there's potentially things are missed on scans, so not just a second read, but seeing if there's a potential missed finding on a scan. Maybe the technology can help us find that, or a misdiagnosis, or at least showing differential diagnosis, what else might be the case. So providing the clinicians with a little more information may be useful.
Brilliant.
And for me, I think I'll echo what you say is access to care. And even in the United States, there's still a lot of people that don't have dental care. And what you can do now is you can have mobile imaging come, take all the images, have everything diagnosed remotely. I could be at my home or I could be on a plane looking at something. And then you can deploy doctors into those specific areas just for the day and not waste time doing data collection, imaging, diagnosis, treatment planning. They can just be treating. I think that's really important. The second aspect is connecting oral health care to medicine, because it's really crazy that we talk like it's two separate things. Like I said, dentistry is always the last specialty of medicine that people think of, and there's jokes about oh, you're a dentist, you're not a doctor, kind of thing. And we know that there's so much research that connects oral health care to systemic health with brain function, heart disease, and Alzheimer's. And if we could be training on the same data sets and have access to the same medical histories, we can make so many more connections with big data that would be impossible without AI.
Could you give an example?
Yeah, you may find that, men between 42 and 57 that are missing 1 to 3 teeth and have 2 to 3 millimeters of bone loss are more likely to have Alzheimer's. We don't know that. But we could if we find millions of patients just like that.
Interesting.
Based on big data. Yeah.
Very great. We'd love to open it up for any questions from the audience at this point in time.
Hi, I'm a recruiter here in New York. I specialise in computer vision and machine learning. One thing I'm really keen to know is, do you see that doctors and radiologists in the future having to train formally in one degree or another within AI and computer vision to continue to be radiologists?
I'll start with the answer. I think it's a really good question. I was just at a recent ACR meeting where this topic came up at least a little bit in terms of whether some of this should be part of the training process for clinicians. I think one of the things that I think people agree on is that the more the clinicians understand about the ways in these algorithms might fail or not work well or not, and how to assess, even if you're not going to be training an algorithm, but if you at least know how to evaluate the output of an algorithm, things like that might be useful information. So similar to having informatics subspecialties and so on, maybe there's some value in having some aspects of this being part of the medical curriculum.
I see a value in, because you cannot study and learn everything, right? You have to specialize anyways. You cannot pick up computer vision and radiology to like the fullest detail, but what I see is really important to understand the concept of, for example, AI is a black box to a lot of people, and so is medicine. Like if you're just a machine learning expert, you don't know much about what goes into medicine, what goes into doctor's head. So to understand the concepts and grasp how AI works, what's your input, what's your output, how are you training, what are you evaluating, I think that would help you embrace even the reconstructed images, if you understand that your AI black box didn't make up thing, right? So I think that's important, and the way it leads to understanding the tools that you're using in the clinic, and being able to do research better in your own field while using that. I think that's the key part.
I agree with what they said. They said it so eloquently, I couldn't say anything more.
Sounds good.
There's another question up here.
Hi, Rick Collier with Microsoft. And thanks for the talk. So I want to kind of riff on your comment on the black boxness of these deep learning techniques. So, we all know that bias is inherent in some of the machine learning models, whether it's, unintentional or intentional, what have you. We're training now on label data from doctors, I assume. That's what we're using, right? So, first question, how do we make sure bias doesn't creep in? It's sort of confirming bias, right? Because how do we know those diagnoses are right? Second, I want to kind of dig a little bit deeper on the question of, and maybe this is the final one, where you talked about reducing false positives, but to the patient, false negatives are the things that hurt the most. Maybe it costs a lot for the doctors to have false positives, and maybe some mental trauma for the patient, but it's the false negatives, the misdiagnoses. So how do we make sure that our machine learning models, that these black boxes are right?
Yeah, I think that from our standpoint, it's that balance of sensitivity and specificity, and I don't think we have the answer yet where that is. But if it's too sensitive, you get boxes all over the image, and if it's too specific, you may miss something. And so I think that's why we still need humans in the loop, is because we don't have that yet. Now, on the question of bias, very difficult. And how we do this and how we try to get rid of bias is trying to get this diagnosis of the masses. Would 9 out of 10 dentists agree that this is a cavity? So when we're training our algorithms, we have thousands of annotators. We have multiple people that have to agree with it before we even throw it in to the algorithm. But it's a problem. It's definitely a problem. I don't know if I have the answer for it.
So I think the bias is a really good question, and one thing one might think about is, besides using the humans as the ground truth, are the other ground truths that one might use. So for instance, you can use, when you're looking at medical imaging, like radiology, you can use pathology as another source of truth, or can you use some amount of follow-up scans to actually know what happened? So instead of just asking a human at this point in time, what was your diagnosis, as the final answer, there are other sources one could also look at.
Yeah, only thing I can add to that is you cannot always label all data, and it's like one of the fundamental problems in AI that people looking into, working with unlabeled data, self-supervised learning or semi-supervised learning. So there is still a lot of work to be done before we can say for sure how it's going to happen.
On one of our products, we have that slider for sensitivity and specificity. So if you go all the way to the left, you get boxes everywhere. If you go all the way to the right, you get something very specific. And we don't know if we have the answer yet. That's why we leave it up to the doctor.
Thanks, guys. We can take one more question.
One quick question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so if you want to become a doctor, you have to go to med school. You have to be certified by a board. There's a lot of regulations, obviously, because you're dealing with other people's lives. To become a computer scientist, you can do it independently on your own. So if you wanted to, go into this field specifically and create AI for medicine, are there going to be any regulations in place? What kind of infrastructure is going to happen?
With our experience, I think that becomes up to the FDA. So you can have a computer vision team that creates something, but then you really have to go through clinical trials if it's going to be used on patients. So I think that's where that cutoff happens. You can build something up to that point, and then if you want to legally use it on patients, that's when the medical community comes in.
Yeah, that's why I can't stress enough the importance of finding people to work with together. Earlier speakers also mentioned finding co-founders, finding partners. So this is a great time if you're in a computer science to work in medical problems. But to do it with the medical community, the experts who can guide you through that approval processes later on once you have done your research and developed a certain product that can integrate into, because if you do it alone, there are open public data sets. You could probably go train your model on them and get them. But to achieve the adoption, finding collaborators, I think, the key to solve this problem. And you don't need to have all the answers about how to get your product approved or how to solve everything alone. Yeah.
That's great. Thank you all so much for joining us up on stage and sharing your insights.
Thank you.